On today's episode, we have Rob Lohman here to share his story of overcoming multiple addictions to drugs, alcohol, and gambling, his redemption from incarceration, and his journey of helping others find freedom in recovery. I'm Adam Vibe Gunton, and this is the Recovered on Purpose show. The black represents the darkness from which we came. The white represents the light in which we now live. And the red represents the passion it takes to live Recovered on Purpose. Today's episode is brought to you by Recovered on Purpose. Recovered on Purpose was founded with the vision of raising up an army of recovered addicts to tell their stories in powerful and impactful ways that will free others suffering from the bondage of addiction, as well as tell our stories in the school system to deter the future generations from going down the path of addiction. I know this is you. If you are watching this show and you are in recovery or you're in active addiction, I know that you're one of the ones that wants to help the future generations from going down the path that we went down. If you want to tell your story, if you want to become part of this movement, shoot me a message on this page or go to recoveredonpurpose.com/contact and tell me about yourself and what you want to do. Also, guys, if you go to recoveredonpurpose.com and subscribe at the bottom, I give you a totally free copy of my Audible and digital copy of From Chains to Saved. Guys, so Rob is a faith-driven family man, an interventionist helping families help loved ones break the cycles of addiction, an online recovery advocate, and the host of Addiction, Freedom, and Faith podcast. Rob, thanks so much for being here, brother.
Adam, I'm stoked to be here with you, man, and just spend a little time just talking about things we're both passionate about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Rob, I've been seeing you doing different challenges and master classes and this stuff. It seems like what you're focusing on right now is intervention and getting in there and helping these families to help people that are suffering from the same things that we suffered from, right? So what we like to do at the beginning of the show is let people know that, you know, we have been there. Like we like to relate to the people that are watching that might still be in early recovery or might still be suffering. So Rob, what is it that was going on in your life? What kind of addictions were going on, and tell us what was going on at that time?
Yeah, life's definitely been a roller coaster for sure, man. And, you know, overcoming alcohol and drug addiction and gambling has been a unique journey. It's like a cornucopia of things happening kind of at the same time, but it's breaking free from it. It's incredible to think about where I was and where I am now. And before we started, I grabbed my little bag of like recovery chips, and I've got them like all over here, you know, my little black bag. But just years of just trying to figure out what the heck happened, and
Right.
but not knowing back then what the heck was going on, man. That was the challenge of how did I get here.
Yeah. So what was it that? So tell us about like what brought you into addiction. That's what we usually go into, like whether it was family or whether it was influence or whether it was just like wrong place at the wrong time. What was it that brought you into alcohol, drug addiction, and gambling addiction?
You know, I look back on it, it's kind of like, you know, hear some people's stories because, you know, I get to interview a lot of people, right? And there was that thing that happened, right? That just like, whoa, no wonder I could see why you like hate God and like start using drugs and alcohol or something like that, right? But that really wasn't my journey. I mean, alcohol was always around. It was kind of like socially acceptable in my family of just parties and social events. And so it's kind of like the allure of, oh, I wonder what that would be like. And then I remember at 14 years old, it was just, again, nothing traumatic happened. It was just hanging out at this youth event. And this guy walks up and says, "Hey, Lohman, I got a 6-pack of beer. And, you know, these 2 girls want to go have a couple. You want some beer with me?" I was like, "Sure, dude." So we go through the bushes into the back. It was like a Christian youth event. It was so funny.
Oh my goodness.
Back on it, you know, it's like those things. But we go back through the bushes. And I what I remember is just like cracking those 3 beers and just being like, just chugging them. And I get in the car after we're done, and my mom's like, "Honey, why are your eyes so red?" And I go, "It's my contacts, Mom." And it was like, okay, I got away with it. So then it was just that manipulation of alcohol, because I swore I would never do drugs, like ever. But middle school, 8th grade, high school, drinking alcohol, yeah, it was that's just what we did. And so to me, that was just like normal.
Right. Right. And that's kind of what I was experiencing too, even with the drugs. I just had people around me that made it almost feel normal to be using these things and drinking. And I love that that your first experience was to hide, manipulate from the authority, right? because that was my experience also. Like that was like what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to do things that we weren't supposed to do and hide it from the authorities, right? So what was it that it led into? You're drinking through middle school, through high school, and where does that lead?
Yeah, I was just having a flashback to our refrigerator back in Fort Worth, Texas. And my parents didn't drink a lot, but my dad liked a beer here or there. And I remember we would like move Coors Lights around or something just to make sure it looked like they were all still in the refrigerator. Or going through my parents' change drawer, and it's like, okay, I know there were like $7 in this thing, so I'm gonna make it look like there's still seven, but I'm gonna take two from here. And but it was just that game. So there's so much energy and just kind of how do I get some money to go do something? But we would go out during lunch and just get drunk or drink some, these Hulu drinks at this little like Chinese place down the street from school. And we go back to school, and my professor, not professor in high school, my teacher was my swim coach in between lunch and when I had swim practice. And I was her teacher assistant. So she just like, they don't even come back. But what started happening was, I mean, I got arrested a couple times, and it was just, we got out of it because I became a professional liar, manipulator, right? And because I never got in really big trouble and I had friends that were worse off than myself, it just was kind of covered up a little bit. And so my parents really didn't know how bad it was. They just knew I was doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. But senior year, and I was a good swimmer, and I know you've had experience like this, but it was the moment of just kind of keep swimming. You're really good at it, or stop getting drunk before practice, right? And I'm like, well, I can keep swimming, stop getting drunk, or I can keep drinking. And so, as a good swimmer would do, I quit swimming.
Right.
It just, and those were the unfortunate things I gave up, was potential. Always got its rear end kicked by alcohol, and that was high school. Just insert crazy story, drunk driving, all that stuff. Not even 21 yet, just off the charts, man. But you always had to have those friends that were worse off than you, so you didn't look as bad.
Right. And that was actually a word that I used to hate in when I was suffering, when I was drinking and using and all that, was the word potential. Everybody else was able to see my potential, right? Everybody else was able to tell me, you have so much potential if you would just stop doing this, or if you would just do this, you have so much potential to do this. And at the time, right, we're not able to see our own potential past the desire to drink and drug, right? So there's an important thing, like what you're doing with interventions and what you're doing with helping people get out of this addiction, and what we're doing here at Recovered on Purpose to share with the kids is the potential of life, right? And this legitimate this legitimate, like, you can do what you actually want to do. And hopefully we get in before the kids have gotten to the path of like drinking above all else, right? So where does this lead after you quit swimming and you start drinking? How does it start going from here to here?
Yeah, well, I mean, college was just the same story as high school. It was just, again, that word. I like how you said that too, just the potential piece, because it's sad to think about, because as people with addictions and addicts and everything, we're in the moment. We don't see the future. It's like, I'm not thinking beyond college. I mean, I went to college to be a doctor, right? And I stayed on campus to study for the MCATs during like the off semester, and all I did was bought kegs for the underclassmen and
Wow.
and partied. And so college was just that, just a blur all the way through. And I graduated somehow in 4 years. And the day of graduation, it was that moment that your whole family's there, like, we're graduating and yay and celebrate. I had like 30 relatives there. And I didn't know if I was going to graduate that morning at all, because
Wow.
my grades were so bad in my major. But I ended up getting the highest score I'd ever had, like this professor had. And he's like, I'm like, okay, did I pass? He's like, yeah. I was like, peace out. And that was just life. So after that, it was just, the party just continued, and it wasn't like major things that happened to say, hey, it's time to quit drinking. Because when you survive the things I went through, like, jumping out of boats at 60 miles an hour and trying to jump over cars and jumping out of, I mean, you don't die through that. So you convince yourself you're invisible. But over time, it really started wearing on me. In my professional career, I went back and got my MBA because I want to be more, professional, while I was still going out 8 nights a week and drinking. Got married in my addiction, just a good alcoholic marriage based on drinking, party, and sex, not much God in the middle of that one. And I grew up a Christian too. So it was like, I always believed that God was keeping me alive for a bigger purpose. I just believe that. And it wasn't this thing like, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to do. But I mean, if I died, I died. It's
Right.
like I had Jesus in my heart and I knew I was going to heaven, or I thought I was, whatever. But over time, it just really started wearing. I hated who I was becoming. I was $67,000 like in credit card debt because I was trying to create this image. I had it all together.
Wow.
Where meanwhile, inside, I was dealing a ton with suicide ideation before I got sober. And it was tearing me up inside in a way that I didn't even know how to comprehend what was going on.
Wow. So those, and we were actually just talking about this on another episode that I recorded. This place where we all get, where we drink and we drug ourselves to a point of we don't want to keep going with it anymore. We don't necessarily know how to stop what we're doing, and we start to think about the only option for us is to end it all. Right. So when you get to that point, how do you get out of that? How do you get away from that suicidal thoughts or what's happening there?
Man, I'll tell you this, even being sober 19 years now, I still deal with suicide ideation every now and then. It just comes in, right? There's the enemy is just there. But in this end of my season of getting the end of my drinking, I would literally start having these, I guess, hallucinations of me dying. Driving up the highway in Fort Wayne, Indiana, going to work in the morning or whatever, and then all of a sudden I would literally see my car veer off the highway and hit a median or a bridge or something, and I would see my car explode, and I would see myself like actually dead on the side of the highway. And that was happening a bunch, but who the heck am I going to tell that to? Like, hey Adam, guess what? I saw myself kill myself last night and in a vision. And like, hey boss, this guy shouldn't represent. I was afraid to tell people, right? And
Yeah.
that was going on a lot more and becoming more consistent in my life. And I was scaring the heck out of me, man. I was just like, what the hell is going on? And then I was hanging out in a bar, June 7th, 2001, and I went out and drank and drove literally like 8 nights a week. I mean, I was the driver,
Yeah.
right? And I wrecked cars, but I never got in trouble, right? But this night, and I started going back to church a little bit. And what I heard the pastor saying was, you need to get your life in order, which he wasn't saying, but that was me crying out to myself, like, dude, you got to change your life. And
Yeah.
I was hanging out in a bar this night. It was music and girls, and it was just loud. And then all of a sudden, Adam, the bar gets completely dead silent. And I audibly hear the words, you're done. And then the bar got really loud again. Now, I was the only person that happened to in the bar, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
But I looked at my buddy Sean O'Brien. I'm like, dude, I got to go home. I don't know what just happened, but I think I'm actually done drinking.
Wow.
And if you and I were hanging out at that time, you'd probably do the same thing. You're like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'll see you tomorrow at the bar. Good luck.
Right.
But something shifted that evening for me to where in those moments of I felt like I was sober, but I was also drunk,
Yeah.
And I had horrible gambling addiction going on. I was doing drugs. Like it was all like cornucopia of like sex and drugs and anything to take me out of my present moment because I hated who I had become. So I'm driving home that night, not sure what's going on. And I get to my 1-bedroom apartment, walk up 12 stairs. And next thing I know, I'm laying on my workout bench with 350 pounds on the barbell. And I pick up that barbell and just drop it. And in the midst of me unhinging my elbows, holding a weight that I could not hold myself, my dog, I mean, this is like milliseconds of time, right? Because literally the weight's coming down. And what I believe happened was God just kind of holding that bar, looking down at his son, going, okay, anytime you're ready to be done with this. And kind of winks at my dog, Jake. And my dog comes over and starts literally nudging my knee, like, Dad, what are you doing? With kind of that dog head tilt thing. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, who's going to feed you in the morning? I mean, I don't really cuss very much, but I said a couple other things, but I was like, who the heck is going to feed you tomorrow morning? And so my heart broke for my dog. I started thinking about my parents. And again, this is like lightning speed in my brain. And the next thing I know, and I believe God just put that barbell back on the rack. Said, not today.
Wow.
And that's so symbolic of my faith now because like God carries the weight of the world, right? He can take it
Amen.
and I can't. And in that night, I believe he did. And we poured out my 2 full bottles of scotch because that's kind of what I could drink in a day through sales and marketing. And I was fit, but everything changed that night. And I woke up the next morning and I was a completely different man. Like it says in the Bible, we become a new creation. And I really believe for me, and my faith is really strong, that that's what happened to me that day, because I didn't go through detox. I didn't go through withdrawal. It was like I had never, ever touched a drug or had alcohol my entire life.
Wow. I think it's pretty amazing that you went up 12 steps to that apartment also. So guys, we're going to take a quick break, and after the break, we're going to talk about what Rob is doing now, how he actually got recovered and moved into this recovery journey of 19 years, and what he's doing now. We'll see you right after the break. All right, guys, today's episode is brought to you by Recovered on Purpose. Recovered on Purpose was founded with the mission of raising up addicts just like you to tell their stories in powerful ways to deter the future generations from going down the path of addiction. We also tell our stories on these platforms in order to share hope with others that are suffering, that they can get free from this thing as well. If you want to tell your story on this platform, or if you want to be interviewed for this show, go ahead and send a message directly to this page and let me know about yourself and what you want to do. I will be doing live interviews on this page, as well as doing interviews for this specific show. So hit me up, guys. Can't wait to see you. All right, guys, welcome back. So before the break, we talked about Rob's journey to the point of basically desperation, and then his walk up 12 steps to an apartment where God just told him that he's done. So Rob, what got you into recovery? What were your steps that you took into recovery, and what happened for the next 10 years? Because I know that you had some dramatic stuff happen in your recovery.
Yeah, you sit there and hear that part of the story we were just talking about. It's like, oh wow, that's crazy. That's the end of it. It's like, no, that's not even the bottom of my life. But what I found was a new hope in recovery, because my aunt Carol had actually been sober for 25 years. She lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she came and picked me up that morning after I made that phone call to my parents for that moment of desperation, right? And here's the crazy thing: my first meeting of willingness, which for me was AA, we ended up parked on the curb in Fort Wayne, Indiana, downtown, and walked straight to the back of this bar. So I walked by, like, 200 liquor bottles, right, to the
Right.
back of a bar, to my first meeting of willingness,
Wow.
right? And these people were happy, they were laughing, and I was just like, okay, last night I tried to kill myself with a barbell. Today I'm in a room full of people that are happy, joyous, and really they seem free. I was like, I'm in. And I'm one of those, like, kind of guys that just jumps in. I'm like, let's just go. I'll figure it out along the way. And so I literally just jumped into community and playing softball, and like learning how to do life sober, how to play golf sober, like how to go on a date, sober without expecting sex, and it was just like all those things, right? It's just like, wow, this kind of feels like good normal living, right? And that was kind of like pink cloud life for a while of recovery, because I was still single, right? So being single in recovery is, a lot easier, I feel like, than having a family and a career, like, a lot of other responsibilities, because you can just disappear and it doesn't affect anybody else. So that was life. I made some strategic moves career wise, due to the help of, guidance and sponsors and mentors and stuff. And then, I moved to Vail, Colorado in 2006. After a broken down RV, I was working on a documentary myself about why people love what they do, right? And my brother lived in Vail, so I moved to Vail. And the cool thing about recovery, no matter what, I'm all about recovery inclusiveness, right? Just whatever, find some kind of community somewhere. But the program I was a part of is everywhere. And so I literally just had instant community, and I loved it. We were doing camping. I was like taking, volunteer roles and all this kind of stuff. And then, God puts this big vision on my heart to do this massive 3-day Christian music festival in Colorado, right? And it was called the God Rally Project. And it was this big thing, bigger than myself. But recovery taught me I can do anything in recovery as long as my spiritual conditioning is fit.
Yeah.
Right. So I've been able to do some really cool things, like run a marathon in Rome in year 2 of my recovery. And I was an 8th grade algebra teacher, like a lot of cool stuff I was able to do. But this journey I was on was really about how do I really impact people on a bigger scale? And so this big vision comes up to me, and I'm like, all right, seems like something I could do. And along the way in 2006, I meet my wife, who I'm married to now, who happened to work for the largest Christian radio station in the world. Right. And it was like, wow. And so it was like this
Amen.
big vision. It was crazy. And And so that thing happened. The God Right Project happened in 2008. We had 15,000 people that came, 72 bands and speakers on 7 stages. Like, it was huge in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, Rifle, Colorado. Sorry if you're from Rifle, but there wasn't a whole lot going on back then. But that was my life. But now I'm married, right? 2006. My son's born in 2007. I got to have my big boy pants on now to like actually have a big boy job instead of follow this vision. And so our marriage kind of got off to a rocky start in ways. So there was kind of this loss of my community in Vail. And I was living in Denver, and I never really got connected to the community over here. So I had this loss of somewhat identity because I was Mr. Recovery, right? And so over time, I just kind of stopped doing recovery, if you will, if that makes sense, and just kind of stopped going to meetings. In 2010, my daughter was born, a beautiful daughter now. And, it was one of those crazy times where like my daughter's gonna be born and the doctors are like, you should abort your doctor because she has a white dot below her brain and she could have some learning disabilities. And I'm like, what the heck? She's just a badass soccer player now. Like, she's awesome. So
Amen.
listening to doctors or whatever, that was just a crazy part of our life, right?
Yeah.
And then I end up getting a big boy job. I started my insurance agency, and over time, I just became this fear-driven man instead of a faith-driven man.
Mm.
I started living out of scarcity instead of abundance.
Yeah.
Because even though I'm not doing substances, Adam, I was deep in my gambling addiction.
Yeah.
And my wife had no clue. I was just like going to casinos up in Blackhawk and buying scratch tickets. So I was being very deceitful again. And I ended up losing my agency in 2011 just due to sales and production numbers. So here's a guy. He's got 2 kids, a wife. The enemy is telling me I failed, right? You suck, you failed, you're a loser. And I was believing all those what became truths about myself instead of what God says about me, right?
Yeah.
And I was on my own little island again. And I was dealing with suicide ideation again. Like, stuff was going on in my head. I wasn't telling anyone about it. Didn't learn my lesson the first time. But now this was more of a mental health struggle because I wasn't using substances. But if anyone out there is dealing with gambling addiction, that is such an insidious disease that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
It's the silent killer, man. And so if anyone is dealing with that, please reach out to me and get those resources, because by the end of it, it's just too late. And for me, I just dug ourselves another financial hole. And not only that, but I convinced myself based on situations that I failed and you suck. And those were the messages I heard daily in the mirror. And I was living on energy drinks, like 4 Go Fast energy drinks a day.
Wow.
Not working out, sugar, all this stuff. So I was a very, very unhealthy individual. And then February 15th came at 1:30 in the morning. Family was in bed. I'm a late owl. Late owl is like when my brain turns on, I think, for creativity. Some people call that manic. I don't know. But the family went to bed. And the crazy thing was that night, that February 14th, the day of love, we watched a very inspirational movie. But in the movie, there's a lot of pain. And I identified more with the pain in the movie than the redemption piece.
Mhm.
And so all the walls in my brain literally like collapsed early morning on February 15th. And next thing I knew is I was getting up to like clean my apartment. I had lit some boxes on fire on my covered patio in a mental blackout. I call it like driven by the subconscious, right? Like, F it, whatever. I don't even know what was going on. But in that moment, I had lit some boxes on fire on my covered patio. And once I came to and realized what I had done, I couldn't stop it. So I slammed the sliding glass door, ran upstairs to get my wife out of her bed. She grabs my 2-year-old daughter out of her crib. I grabbed my 4-year-old son out of his bed, and we run downstairs. And what ended up happening next, when we left the house and shut the door, I got all my neighbors out like everybody was safe, right? And when we left our townhouse, the backdraft caught and literally exploded the back of our house, the back of our townhouse. And it was like a 5-alarm fire. It was like freaking insane. And I'm looking around like, how in the heck did I get here? I was so far off the path. Right. But the addict mind kicks in. So I had a cover up story right away. And like, we kick into gear. And, over time, after 3 weeks of lying, I had just had to come clean and tell my wife what was going on. And so when I sit down with like families now doing interventions and all this kind of stuff, and they're like, well, we'll just wait till our loved one hits hits bottom. I'm like, let's bring the bottom to your loved one and say, hey, look, dude, here's where you can go, but you're here now.
Right.
You haven't gone there yet. And I wish, and I mean, sometimes I guess I don't have regret about my life, but back then, if I would have reached out for help and been open, honest, and vulnerable like I am now, that never would have happened. But now that's my story. That's our story, my wife and my story. And so I ended up confessing to what happened to authorities, and that just began the journey of prison, which I had no clue about up to that point.
Right. And how long did you spend in there?
So fortunately, it was only 10 and a half months, but I was looking at, listen to this. I confessed in June of that year to authorities. It was silent and dark for 6 months because I fell through the cracks or something. I don't really know what happened, but they would not let me turn myself in. But man, I ran back to AA, I ran back to church, I ran back to mentors. Like I was in, like, I needed to figure out how the heck did I get here, right?
Yeah.
So in December of that year, 2012, I got arrested on 19 felonies and 13 misdemeanors, to
Wow.
which God did amazing miracles, right? And then in July of 2013, I was looking at 2 years of work release to 56 years in prison. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was, it was like questions that I never got asked along the way. Like I'm serious, like gambling addiction. Like, hey, would you struggle with gambling addiction? Like no one ever asked me. I could have like probably gone to treatment to get help instead of go to prison, right? But I was only gone, thank God, for 10 and a half months. And God got me out on an arson charge that they don't let into halfway houses. But I spent the next 11 months after that living in a halfway house just by the grace of God. And while I was incarcerated, hey, there's my dog Max. My wife just got home. Hey, we'll say hi to them real quick. Hey Max. Hey Max. Max makes the show sometimes, so sorry about that one. But while I was incarcerated, I was able to focus on who the heck is Rob Lohman, right? Who is Rob? And I mean, I read 42 books when I was gone. Like over my shoulder here is like a stack of the books I read, and I got to figure out who I was, like who I truly am. And for me and my faith, it's who God says I am. And so I
Yeah.
got to understand and dive into those truths while my wife, unfortunately, was back home being a single mom, trying to figure out, like, is her husband crazy? How do I put food on the table? Like, what school do they go to? How do I get them to soccer? So she was back home being a single mom, and I'm kind of like going to seminary in prison, figuring out who the heck I am.
Right. I mean, sometimes, in recovery, I've had to search for who I am as well. Obviously, we all have different paths to that, but your story obviously is something that can give other people hope and get other people to lift their bottom. And when we were talking about the bottoms, like, I think rock bottom is a myth. Like letting somebody hit their rock bottom, because I thought it was my rock bottom when I was in an apartment writing a suicide note on an iPad and shooting up a full syringe of heroin to kill myself, and then waking up in the morning yelling at God. I thought that was rock bottom. But then all of a sudden, a few years later, I'm on the floor of a corporate housing apartment calling my mentor, who's an Inc. 500 CEO, telling him I want to kill myself. I can't stop shooting up heroin and meth. And I thought that was rock bottom. And then all of a sudden, I find myself in a homeless shelter, looking around at all these homeless people, and I'm like, and I think I'm at rock bottom. And then I get 86th from that homeless shelter. The whole thing about rock bottom, like wherever, if you're out there and you're struggling, like don't think that like that you'll hit it, because there's death, and so many of us are hitting death. And guys, in recovery, like Rob's story is telling you, like, don't suffer alone. I can tell you right now, yesterday, I sat down with somebody that I'm helping, a sponsee, and right after that, I sat down with a mentor, with my pastor, and told him about a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in my own life right now, because I have to keep myself straight. I have to keep myself, my cup has to be full in order to be able to do these videos, in order to be able to do these interviews and things. And it's the same thing for Rob. The only way that he's able to do these interventions, to do these things, is by having a full cup. So Rob, tell us about these interventions that you're doing and why it is that you're moving into this area of life.
Yeah, it's really interesting you were saying that, because we talk about the bottom, and a lot of families will call me and we'll talk about it, right? And we'll talk about the process and I'll ask tons of questions and get kind of a history. I'll say, well, I just don't think we're ready to do this yet. And it's so sad, because I follow up with everybody when I call back months or whatever the, follow-up period time feels appropriate later, because they just tune me out and their loved one's dead sometimes,
Oh my gosh.
right? And it sucks. And it's, or they just got a DUI. Now we're ready to do something. Or, okay, now I'm really ready to leave him because like he pushed me last night and I hit my head. I mean, it's only going to get worse if there's a need to say, hey, I think we need to do an intervention, right?
Right.
In intervention, I mean, it's a whole, I do webinars about like, hey, here's what an intervention looks like, and kind of give like an hour long talk through the intervention world. But I got into the intervention field because having felonies on my record, it was hard to get a great, like a job to take care of my family. So I'm like, hey, a lot of people with felonies start their own business, right? So I went through tons and tons and tons of training to learn how to do this, and just like, I want to learn this industry because I'm a learner, and to go through different modalities and learn all this different ways. Okay, that's cool. That would work for me. There's no way that would work for me. And figure like what works for my personality to help people. And this isn't a cookie cutter thing that we do as an interventionist, at least the way I do them, because everyone's different. Your stories are different. The situations are different. But the bottom line is people are lost and people are hurting and they're trying to figure out a way out.
Yeah.
So my goal is to open people's eyes to say, okay, we've done the best we can to this point. How about learning some new tools? You can use them if you want to or don't, whatever. People that use them tend to have a better success rate. Families that don't are stuck. And so, the calls come in and it literally is just getting a lowdown on what is the story and just listening intently. And I don't share much about my journey because it's not the purpose of that call. But as we start unraveling it and you hear something from a different family member, like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay. And you hold that in confidence because you're not like going back and forth between family members. And it's like, wow, okay, that's good to know, because that helps me formulate like an appropriate treatment plan for their loved one.
Right.
Right. Because if someone comes in and they're having phone calls and they've been abused by men their whole entire life, well, I may not be the right person for the intervention.
Right.
Right. So therefore, I have friends and colleagues all over the country. I'm like, hey, I want to talk to you about this one. Would you be open to helping this family out? Because I don't think I'm the right guy for that particular reason. So it's just an honest assessment of what's going on. And I mean, there's been interventions done in my family on relatives, and I got aunts and uncles and cousins and alcoholics and people that died and people in recovery. So I get both sides of it. So I'm just an open book. I'm not ashamed of my story. I don't have any guilt or anything because Christ took that away from me, at least.
Amen.
So it's really just being real with the family members, saying, hey, here's what makes sense. How can you get the best help for the least amount of money?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard when you hear people say, well, we've spent $450,000 sending little Johnny to treatment after treatment after treatment. I'm like, that's because it's not working.
Right.
And so really just having an honest appraisal of what's going on and say, this is my recommendation. And then the biggest part for family members is this is a family issue. It's not just your loved one that happened to have a gambling addiction and have like multiple mortgages on the house you didn't know about. It's like, okay, there's stuff going on to where you have to be able to talk about that or the addiction or whatever it is. So I want the family to get complete help. So any place I refer people to for whatever has got to have a family component to it somehow. And if they don't buy into that, there's not really they're just kind of wasting money on treatment and intervention costs and stuff because they're not willing to change at all.
So basically, I actually get messages from family members, and I personally am not an interventionist, and I tell them, that person has to hit me up because that's just kind of the way that I do things. But you're saying that if someone out there has a family member that's suffering that they want to do an intervention with, they should hit you up?
Yeah, I mean, because again, so here's the funny thing. Like sometimes I'll ask a family member a question and say, "Hey, have you ever asked Adam if he wants to get some help?" And a lot of times it's no. It's just like they tell him like, "You need to get your stuff together, Adam." You instead of say, "Honey, like, are you sick and tired of like doing this?"
Yeah.
And a lot of times the answer is yes. They just can't say it. So sometimes I have coffee with a family member and get them on a treatment path just by sharing my story and being real with them. Instead of them paying thousands and thousands of dollars for an intervention. Now, a lot of times it is necessary, and there's a way to approach it to say, okay, we're going to orchestrate this beautiful picture of love, not hatred and anger and resentment, but we want to get your loved one back. And deep down inside, that person wants to get back to themselves. They just don't know how the heck to do it. So if I can open their eyes to help and say, hey, here's some options. You get to choose. There's no van outside. We're going to toss you in with a head over your bag. And like, you get to choose what path you want to go down. Now, by doing that, there are going to be some changes in the family system if you choose option B instead of A, but it's your choice. And now I will help that person navigate that journey while also helping the family navigate their journey. And hopefully those journeys are the same and they can come back. And sometimes it's just kind of like, whatever, middle bird, flip off. I don't care. We're done. And that's it. And no one wants any help.
Right.
So it's delicate and very thoughtful process.
But the ones that do need help and do want help, those two coupled together, when you need help and you want help, there's people like Rob out there for you. So Rob, I want to thank you so much for being here for this episode. Guys, thank you for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this. And if you're suffering in recovery or with your active addiction, guys, reach out. There's people out there that want to love you, that want to hear what you're going through, and you're not alone. Thanks so much for being here, Rob.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Appreciate you.
We'll see you guys next time. Love you. The black represents the darkness from which we came. The white represents the light in which we now live. And the red represents the passion it takes to live recovered on purpose.